Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Pages to Progress. I'm here with John. Thanks for joining me, John.
Welcome.
Myself and John have been we've been reading through this book together, and we've been inviting everyone else at Eastside on the Journey to come and join with us and read through this book. If you want to know, the book is called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Oh, because of my background, you can't see it properly. It doesn't matter. You'll see the details on the website. There we go. Thanks, John. And we're in chapter 2. Maybe as a quick summary, John, is it fair to say that James Cone is critiquing Niebuhr throughout this chapter, Reynold Niebuhr?
Oh, no question at all. I mean, he knows Niebuhr, respects Niebuhr, and I think would consider Niebuhr and Barth two of his mentors while he was at Union College, theological studies that he was doing. Very much respects Niebuhr and Barth, which I think is what this whole chapter revolves around. He not only respects him, but I guess he respects him enough that he feels like he can be somewhat critical of him, which I thought was interesting.
Which is really crazy because it's almost like Niebuhr has a bitter taste in his mouth as he's writing, because he's really kind of telling him off as to an omission in his theology. But we'll get onto that in a minute. For those of us who don't know who Reynold Niebuhr is, I'm going to give you a quote that you might have heard of. This is the same guy who said, "God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." I think, John, you said that's in Alcoholics Anonymous and some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of Alcoholics Anonymous and the meetings that they participate in.
So let's maybe have a very quick conversation just to talk about a little bit about this. Do you think that James Cone's critique on Reynold Niebuhr is fair? And just to basically home in so that we can get a little bit deeper, the critique on Niebuhr is that Niebuhr writes omitting the Black experience, the Black lynching, the Black oppression, and he kind of just scoots over it to talk about other subjects. Do you think that his critique was fair, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think his critique is fair. I think it is also fair to say it's somewhat in hindsight, but the critique he had was that Niebuhr could have done a lot more with the Black community and failed to do so while all of this stuff was going on during that time period. And this was, quite a while ago. He comments that Niebuhr got involved with the Jewish community, raised the Jewish community up with his works, and that Niebuhr was not unaware of what was going on because the bombing at the church that killed 4 girls, the Birmingham bombing, I think it was, he was able to be there and see what was going on around that bombing, and still was not, getting involved and, including the Black community in what he was working on.
It's really crazy. As a Brit, I'm so new to all of this history. I'm learning myself, trying to really engage in it. And I think we were having a previous conversation, John, about this, how it's even foreign to common American education as well in some respects. But there was so much significance in an interview between James Baldwin and Niebuhr.
Right.
And I'll share something of what took place. So in the bombing, there was a stained glass window that was destroyed, and the face of Jesus was destroyed. This was Baldwin's response to that. It says, "The absence of the face of Jesus," he's talking about, "is something of an achievement since we've been victimized so long by an alabaster Christ." Then he goes on to say, "It sums up the crisis we're living through. If Christ has no face, then perhaps it's time that we, who in one way or another invented and are responsible for our deities, give him a new face and make the hope of Christian love a reality." I remember, I don't know if you have this, John. Do you know them Maxwell books that we had when we were a kid?
Yeah.
Okay, so as an Adventist church, as our kids, my mum still has those Maxwell books. I grew up on the alabaster face Jesus. I grew up on the long blonde hair, the blue eyes Jesus. And it's so strange because when you look at other cultures, like when you look at some of the Indian religions like Hinduism or Buddhism, their gods look like their people, so to speak. But when it comes to
Right.
Christianity, it's so strange that the alabaster Jesus had made a very presence, but Baldwin uses that as a kind of metaphor to symbolize maybe it's time we create a new Jesus. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that, John?
No, I mean, we all know that Jesus was Jewish and probably had more of a Middle Eastern look. I think a lot of the quote alabaster Christ came from the Renaissance movement, where a lot of the artistic depictions were European. And I think a lot of that carried over to America, obviously. But I think the situation in America is a little bit different because, and Cohen speaks very much about a certain underlying white supremacy in America. And I think that only reinforces the alabaster Christ, because, I grew up with those books. I'm a white American male. And until someone actually brought that to my attention, it just never occurred to me. And so a lot of it is bringing this to the attention
because it's
of
been
people.
normalized for so long.
Right. Yeah. And so, and I've told you this before as well, I feel in a little way, a little awkward talking about this, because in a lot of ways, I'm part of the problem that Cohen is addressing, even way back when. I mean, his first book came out the year I was born in 1969.
Right.
And so it's obviously been a problem preceding that, and it's continued to be a problem until now with this recent Black Lives Matter movement that's going on, not only reinforcing a problem that it's been, but also showing us how much hasn't been done to address the problem and get it turned around.
It's interesting you say that. I'm going to quote you and say I'm part of the problem. Here's the thing. Do you think that there is some kind of expectation that Cohen has on Niebuhr?
Oh, definitely. And
do you think it's fair as well?
I think the expectation that Cohen has for Niebuhr is that Niebuhr, being a man of influence, should have taken on what he saw going on all around him with African Americans. They were not being treated well, and that's an understatement. They were being treated poorly to the point where lynchings were going on, and Cohen knew that Niebuhr knew, but at the same time, Niebuhr wasn't doing anything about it from his level of study and influence from the university they were working out of. Now, I told you earlier, I'm not sure that's totally fair.
Okay.
After I thought about it, and I'm a little conflicted on it. I mean, it was a great opportunity for Niebuhr, but at the same time, as a Seventh-day Adventist, and someone that picked up Ellen White in my college years and respect her, but also know that she's a human and not what I base my theology on. She never really went out of her way, at least from my studies, to take a stand on slavery, because she was alive when the Emancipation Proclamation occurred, which was 1863. I looked that up a little bit earlier. And she had an opportunity to do something about it and didn't. And so in a lot of ways, I feel about Ellen White the way Cohen felt about Niebuhr. But at the same time, and not everyone can do everything all the time. And you reflect farther back, Jesus had his mission to come to earth and to die for our sins and rise again. But that was during a time of Roman occupation where there were slaves, and certainly equivalent or even worse injustices done. I mean, and Cohen mentions it, Christ's crucifixion is literally the definition of a lynching in a lot of ways. And, that was 2,000 years ago, and he's addressing it, in his community. But Christ did not take a stand against slavery specifically that I can find.
So here's some of the challenges that I'm I'm hearing when you're speaking and stuff. I think so. So we haven't got time to go into it, and we could do another time where we look at what Ellen White did say about slavery. She did call it out, but the truth is there is truth to what you're saying. You do have to dig. You do have to dig in order to find it. One thing I will say about the Adventist Church is the Adventist Church was founded on the movement of social justice. And many of the early Millerites actually refused to vote Republican or Democrat on the basis that a lot of them were still supporting slavery. And they chose, I think they chose another party or something like that. But the idea is that a lot of the founding forefathers of Adventism in the late 1800s were very anti-slavery. But I think back to the expectation of what Cone has on Reynold Niebuhr in his theology is based a lot on the fact that he focused on so much social justice in his writings and failed to mention the Black experience that was before his eyes. I don't think, I'm with you, John, I don't think everyone needs to be the next Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. I don't think anyone needs to be the next James Cone or whoever it is. But I do think that he calls us to anti-silence, anti-racism, and action in wherever we can in one way. So I'm going to share one video that I saw yesterday. It was quite profound. It was a white guy. He was at some kind of dinner, some kind of establishment. And then there was loads of white people sitting around the table, and a guy at the table was about to tell a racist joke. He started telling the joke, and he kind of saw where it was going. Maybe you've been there. You know where people are saying something. You kind of know where it's going to go. And he's about to tell a racist joke, and it's going to be a joke at the expense of Black people. And this guy in the video yesterday tells about how uncomfortable he was, and he just rose. He just spoke, and he said, "Hey, look, I'm really sorry. I'm going to stop you right there. I feel like that this joke is going to be at the expense of Black people. I'm going to ask you, please do not tell the joke, or I'm going to leave the table." And he didn't tell the joke, and the whole table was super awkward after that. Like it was like you could hear a pin drop. It was so awkward, and it was just uncomfortable and miserable and all these different things. And he talks about the idea of, in order to be anti-racist, it requires you to enter the table of awkwardness. And I think one of the things that is incredibly powerful about what Cone is trying to bring across is we cannot understand how to have a proper interpretive lens of society unless we look through the theology of the cross, the theology of suffering. And actually, who better to guide us through the theology of suffering than the very ones who have suffered?
Right.
And so I think in answer to some of your questions on what we're talking about, John, is it's about keeping our eyes open and our ears pinned to what's happening right now and translate it through the theology of the cross.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you totally. I would add the one last step would be to actually take action.
Yes.
Because knowing's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And Christ certainly had awkward moments, but he was taking action against things that everyone standing around him knew about.
Right.
And that's what made it uncomfortable.
Mm.
And I think that action is important, especially in this day and age, addressing this problem that hasn't changed a lot since, Cone's first works came out, 50 some years ago. And it's not good enough to just see the problem and not do anything.
Right.
I think it has to be an anti-racism stand where you actually take action. And how to go about doing that, I'm still struggling with a bit. So I don't have all the answers.
But I think that is okay. I think that the first part of the journey is coming to the table of struggle. I think that's the first part, because as people of God, the more that we surround ourselves the more that we surround chaos, God will show us what to do. in that chaos.
Yeah.
And it's important that we're here at the table right now. And I do believe God is going to reveal to us what it is. If it's on an individual basis at the table, just before a racist joke is just going to be said, it's to speak up. It's to not be silent in the face of everything. I'm gonna finish with the last quote. You can add a quote if you want, John, if you have one. I don't mind. But the one that stuck out to me right at the end, and he says, white theologians do not normally turn to the Black experience to learn about theology. And I'm going to add my own addition to this, but there is an expectation that Black people learn theology from white theologians. And I think Cohn's point is there is value in having a broad understanding that theology comes to all people. And right now, we have missed a huge part of the perspective of God because we have not included the Black experience. God is very present in the Black experience, and which is why we need to focus on the Black experience. Those are some of my final thoughts on chapter 2. Have you got anything to add, John?
No, I mean, the only thing I'd have to add is I think there's a little bit of disappointment on the part of Cohn against Niebuhr. I mean, there's criticism for sure, but I think it comes out of disappointment. And I think the underlying current's exactly what you said, that there is a wealth of knowledge to be gained from that Black experience, that if you haven't tapped into it, you aren't going to be able to have in your life, and not going to be able to let it make you a better person. 100%. And so I think there's value in what he has to say, and I look forward to exploring that more in this book.
Yes. So next week we'll be going through chapter 3. I'm seeing the title, Bearing the Cross and Staring Down the Lynching Tree. Immediately that has kind of brought me to something that was talked about in this chapter. You remember he talked about Simon, the Cyrene, and that is really, really interesting. We're not going to go there, but I'm sure he's going to go deeper into that because actually he inspired me to actually maybe even focus on a sermon on that. But anyway, next week we'll be looking at chapter 3. If you want to join the conversation and if you want to join the journey and reading the book, then please do that. Go to Amazon, search The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Could you show the book again for us? And by James Cohn. This is the book that we are going through. Anyway, we hope you guys are blessed. We're kind of struggling through this, but hopefully God is going to give us
It's
insight.
not a super easy read. I mean, it's very doable, but it does come from, I would say, I said originally philosophical, and you said theological, but it's probably a combination of the two background.
All right. Well, we want to thank everyone for joining us. We'll see you next week. God bless.
Sounds good.